Welcome to MT Fridays. We're Melonya Johnson, owner of BSMART Coaching, and Tahitia Timmons, owner of Conscious by Us. Together, we're here to fill your Fridays with unscripted conversations that cover the gambit: politics, current events, science, social justice, health and wellness, and more. We're here to elevate the conversation. We're fighting the brain drain, one unscripted conversation at a time. So grab your coffee, tune in, and let's dive into another episode of MT Friday.
I don't know why it cut off. That's weird. Good morning, Tahisha.
Good
Yeah.
morning.
That time I did nothing to it. It just stopped. Well, welcome to MT Fridays, folks. I'm Melonya Johnson, and that's Tahisha.
Hi, I'm Tahitia. We are, I'm not going to say I'm excited to be in this space with you, but we're coming to it, I think, after, some hard days. I know I personally try to be low social media. It's sometimes hard. I try to focus on reflecting and just what the future might look like. So, but you and I have been doing these Fridays for a couple of weeks now. We haven't been doing them on LinkedIn. We've been doing them mainly on other channels that we have. So this is the first time we're actually doing this on LinkedIn Live. So,
and what a show it's going to be. And I'm having issues with my light today because it's got too much light coming in. Well, let's get started, shall we? So,
yeah.
I'm going to start off on a positive note. Yesterday, I was coming home and my neighbor was collecting her mail. And she came over and she gave me a hug. And she went, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how this election turned out." And she happens to be a white woman who has biracial children. And we talked for a little bit, and we talked about our sadness as it related to the fact that women, for the foreseeable future, will not be able to have autonomy and the right to control their own bodies. And we talked for a minute, and she has a daughter. And I came into the house, and the next thing I knew, she was at my door with a Happy Meal. She had cooked dinner and bought me. She said, "This is comfort food." She said, "Because sometimes we need comfort." And she's a really good cook and a great baker. And she brought me, and I don't eat rice because of my health condition, but I ate that rice yesterday. It was delicious. And it was comforting. She had made these homemade cookies. They might have been snickerdoodles, not sure. She gave me 3 of them. I ate them all. They were delicious. And it reminded me that regardless of whatever happens, we have neighbors and we
Yeah.
have our community and we have goodness that we're putting out in the world, and hopefully we'll be receiving some goodness. And that act of kindness was the highlight, the bright spot in this week, and which has been a very dark week.
Yeah. And so I love that you started on the moments of kindness, right? Because I've seen the same. And so in our personal networks and communities, this is the time to really come together and remember that for many people, this has been a hard week and it will continue to be hard weeks ahead. And just to give comfort and love and space when people need it, and just to reach out to your neighbors, to be here and supportive of each other as we all kind of sit in community, because ultimately we are the communities and networks we make. And I hope that we can, like you said, focus on that. My neighbor next door, a guy, we didn't talk about the election at all. But we had a wonderful conversation. And I know that I don't talk to this guy very often, but I know that he was reaching out in the spirit of community, because he was like, "How are you doing?" And we didn't talk about the what is the how are we doing, right? But he was just like, I'm your neighbor. I'm here if you ever need anything type of conversation. And that meant a lot to me. I do walk about around my neighborhood, probably talking loudly on the phone to you and like, and so, but I just really felt the love of the people in the neighborhood. People just saying hello, how are you doing, more than before, or more than normal. So I want people to know that, if you need comfort and you need love or you need to just sit, Melonya and I are here for those who need to, gather their thoughts and resonate and be in community. Sometimes we just need to be in community, or
Yeah.
to look at each other and just give a nod and like, how's it going?
Well, we do. We do. And I guess, I know we're streaming live to LinkedIn today. And the truth of the matter is, and LinkedIn is supposed to be about business and things of that nature, but we're all human beings. And we come to our jobs and we come into our society. And sometimes we're carrying some things with us. And I think that people should know, and Black folks are absolutely not a monolith, but I can tell you that many of us are feeling some kind of way these days because there are no illusions as to the America that we live in. And I think because of that reality, we have to make choices in how we're going to live and how we're going to thrive in this hostile environment that Black folks find themselves. And I'm personally speaking for my Blackness, right? I can't speak for others, right? But I know that I feel very differently, and I understand that this is a hostile country for me. One of the things that we watched, or I watched, or endured during this last election was really some of the horrible things that were said about about a woman who is very credentialed, who is highly educated, who has served her country, who is a decent human being. And some of the things that were said were absolutely vile. They said that she slept her way to the top. Black women have been sexualized since we arrived in this country, right? And that was a nod, a lean, a scream to that sexualization of us. They said that she was being handled by her pimp handlers, indicating that she is a lady of ill repute, so to speak, right? And so I endured this with the hope that at the end of this election, that I would never in my lifetime have to endure that type of racism and ugliness again. But here we are post-election, and I understand that this is going to be the reality of these United States. And so if you feel something different from your Black friends and colleagues, it's because we're feeling different. And we have to figure out how to not just, um, uh, you know, limp along,
Yeah.
because this is our only life and we
Yeah.
want to live the best life. So
We,
we
we
have to figure out how to thrive despite being implanted in hostile soil.
Yeah, we have to figure out how not to be drowned by the sorrow and the grief that we may be under right now or experiencing. And how do we kind of draw strength and renew and have energy to look at, well, what does the future look like? And for myself, for those who hold multiple identities, so I'm queer, I'm Black and Jewish. Um, I am partially, I have some mobility issues, and I'm autistic. And so, what does it look like, all of these layers of identity in this world moving forward, along with being a woman, right? So, what does that look like as a business owner? I live in a state that is a blue state, has historically been a blue state. But what does that look for my business outside of the state? And so, for those of us on LinkedIn who have consulting businesses, coaching businesses that are in equity, justice, diversity, inclusion, this is a concern for us, because when you look at policies that look to kind of eat away at some of the regulations and regulatory practices that are out there that some of us speak to and help organizations navigate through, what does that future look like? What does the future look like if some of the practices that are in place no longer are in place, or policies are in place? What does it look like when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ERGs and business practices, and how you get people even motivated to join groups at companies if they feel their work is going to be in vain? Because you've kind of had this announcement that the majority of the country doesn't really feel like inclusive practices and equity are as important to those that it's directly impacted. So how will organizations view this? How will companies view this? Will they continue to support these programs? Because lifting these programs, and I remember lifting these programs as someone working in companies, lifting these programs took effort, and it took the effort and voices of marginalized people to get ERG started, and DEI councils and inclusive practices. And for many of us are sad that, what will our company look like if they no longer feel the need to support this, or will face backlash for supporting certain thoughts and policies? So that's the other thing I've been thinking about. What will this look like? What does health equity look like if you have a government that doesn't seem to be focused on equity practices, or moving forward might not be as focused on the equity issue?
I'm feeling some kind of way about this, and we've talked about this DEI work. I am running from it, like I'm running away from a fire, and not because I don't think it's important work. I do, but I've also come to, and I'll share that I have a friend who has been in a hospital setting of some sort for over a year, who was very heavily involved in DEI. She was hired by companies to promote DEI, and they were hostile environments, right? And I believe that the stress of that wore her down, and she became gravely ill, and she's still trying to recover. And that example made me think about my work and my mental fitness and my mental well-being. And I told, because I have a part-time gig on top of my own business, but I told them that this is not work that I'm going to do, because it's not mentally safe. It is not safe for our mental well-being. It's very different, because, and let me frame this, those of you companies who think, well, this is still important to us, and this is something that we still want to do. See, the same people that voted the way that they voted, in terms of being comfortable with racism and being comfortable of either being racist or being comfortable with racism, are the same people that we, people in the DEI space, face. And we face their hatred, and we face their resistance. And no one from the white world is asked to wake up every day and face hate and resistance and people's ugliest nature. But that's what is asked of those people who work in the DEI space. And so I've come to a point in my life and in my career where I really feel that that's white people's work. It's your work to fix your hearts. It's your work to embrace and understand the need for equity, the need for equality, the need for power sharing. If you're trying to embark on some DEI initiative and you're not looking at power structures, it's for nothing. Because at the end of the day, what white folks are being asked to do is to share their power. And that's not something historically that most people under great circumstances do. So my expectation for there actually being a change has evaporated. And so I'm saying to my white colleagues and those people who call themselves allies, do your own work. Enroll in classes that help you to look at your own biases and look at your own stereotypes. Hire companies that, if you feel inclined, that can look at your policies and look at the way that you function to see, is it inclusive? You do the work. Stop asking those who have been victimized and continue to be traumatized to come and fix you. It's not our responsibility, because even when we try to, nothing changes. So my mindset these days is and I'm not saying that I'm not working with white folks or whatever. Life goes on. I'm going to serve whoever needs my services and whoever needs my talents. But I'm also going to focus on what can I do to make certain that people in my community thrive. And I want to talk about some Black apps, shopping apps, or whatever. Our dollars are power, and where we put them, Jeff Bezos, owner of Amazon, who decided not to support anyone in this race, where can we use our economic power to create an environment where we thrive?
Yes. And so Melonya, you know this, I don't 100% agree with you on this. So I do believe that ownership of I don't even want to use the word ownership, but I do believe that we need much more responsibility and much more buy-in from our white colleagues. I'm just going to say it. You can't bring in organizations to help you to move in that space, but then not empower those who have to implement those policies with supporting them. It can no longer just be we have a group and that's how we're conquering equity or we're being more inclusive. We have to really be focused on implementation and practice. And I believe personally that perhaps we have, in the attempt to make diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work and belonging and all of those pieces feel like they have merit, we have high-leveled them up and talked about them with language that is not inclusive to everybody who hears it. Because sometimes I will hear dialogues that have not been explained fully, where we're saying words where we're not on the same page. And this is not me saying, oh, we need to dumb down the language of DEI, but I think we need to think about, well, who is our audience? Who are we speaking to? And are people on the same page with even the words that we're using when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion practices and belonging? Not everybody is coming in as, reading up on politics, or this is not their passion. Like, if this is not their passion, they're not coming in having done the work that some of the people who are living in these marginalized spaces see in their algorithms and are doing every day. And so what I'm asking of white colleagues is to start to do that work, to start to look at, well, what are your brothers and sisters experiencing? And what do we mean when we say misogyny, right? Like, that's like, a lot of people don't even understand that basic word. Like, what does it mean when people say there's misogynistic practices, and what does that look like in movies? And we're inundated with a culture that prioritizes, quote, a heteronormative white society. Well, what does heteronormative mean when we say that? So I think some of it is we've attacked these concepts, and even I'm too high leveling this right now. We've gone after this goal with, the people that are going to create change and really going to start to push things forward are the people who are experiencing sexism, racism, homophobia, genderism, like all of these things, racism. Like, these are the people we need to start. What are your experiences? How can I get you involved? How can I get you to see that some of the fiscal pieces that are very important in this nation, but that also the social piece is important? Like, what about the social piece for your brothers and sisters who are working alongside you? What does that look like? And when I say brothers and sisters, I really want us to feel more like brothers and sisters with people who are outside of our identity. And I say that because I have so many identities sitting in here that I almost, there's no way that I can't be brothers and sisters with people, because there's a part of my heart that aches when anyone is treated unfairly. And that includes the white college educated women who did come out and who probably feel like, don't lump me in with other people, and white college educated men who are like, this is not me. So I hear you there. This is not just about, like, a lot of people think this is a Black issue or a Hispanic issue or Latinos. I'm using both words because not both words are valid for all people. AAPI, like, even when we say AAPI, what does AAPI mean? Like, we have all these shortcuts to things that we're communicating in ways that people are not on the same, communication plan with. So I really hope that what comes out of this is more discussions about the communication. And Melonya is going to share some resources for investing in Black apps and Black businesses. I really want us to focus on, kind of, for those who are listening, the stress piece, right? What does it look like to not get into arguments or angry discussions with people? What does it look like? I know people who are like, I'm going through and getting rid of people on my social media. What does it look like to kind of sit and in this space and start looking at, well, what do I need to start talking about so I can bring more people into my fold, most versus like push people out of the fold? We have to get young people too to resonate around the equity and justice and inclusion and belonging piece in social media, that social media could be used for, that perhaps we have not motivated them in that way. And for anyone listening, I believe we did open up the comments. We'd love to hear your comments if you're listening, thoughts around this, because Melonya and I, we both agree, we don't have the answers. We may not even have correct answers, but we want to kind of like, what are people thinking? Like, I know how I felt. I know how, the past few days have been, but, I'm also here for our queer community and our disabled community who also may be fearful. Those who are fearful around, what happens with the Marriage Act, right? So not that we want to be fear mongers, but we know that, this is a time that a lot of people just need us to, especially in organizations, maybe have a moment of, we're shifting our mindset around, well, what does this look like when you don't know what the template is going to look like?
This is not an election that this was a historic election. I think for many reasons, and maybe many people on both sides of the equation felt that it was an election for democracy. Some of us see that it doesn't feel like it's we're moving towards a democracy. It feels like we're moving away from it. I really encourage any company that is serious about I'm going to talk about the business case of diversity for a second. Companies who have diverse workforces that create inclusive environments where people can show up and be their authentic self. And when I say authentic self, is that I might think differently. Or if you might be a person like Tahitia that has different intersectionalities that give her a perspective on life that's going to be very different from mine. And if I can create a safe space for her to bring her experiences and her perceptions and her insights into our discussions that happen on Zoom and happen in our conference rooms as we make decisions and as we build services and as we build products and as we try to increase our market shares and things of that nature, when we create those type of environments where people can feel that I have a great idea, but I'm in an organization that tamps down anything that doesn't look like everything we've always done. If you create those kinds of environments, you will benefit from having a diverse workforce that is totally self-actualized. They come to the table fully themselves, and they come in innovation in diverse companies that have focused on making things equitable and inclusive and equal. They then really benefit from what the of diversity brings to the table. And I hate for it to sound transactional like that, but if you look at it just purely from a business sense, that is one reason to continue to do this work. I think we all have a moral reason to make certain that everyone on this planet feels like they're at home in their own skin and in their workplaces and in their communities. And I think that is a moral argument. I don't believe that this work should stop. I think that it should be more intentional. And I think that those folks who are typically in power, who are white people, they need to understand and really understand their own motivations, their own limitations, and as well as the real culture of their organization and how people really feel and how they're really being treated. Before you start to hire DEI experts and things of that nature, understand before the work begins, work has to happen before to create a fertile environment to start this work so that it can take hold, that it can take growth, and so that you can create a safe environment where people understand that we're going to be talking about some difficult conversations, but it's grounded in compassion, my compassion for understanding who is on my team, who's in my organization, who how are we impacting the community that we work in? How are we going after and recruiting people? How intentional are we? So before you start the work, there's some work to help you. Like, for example, and I'll use this analogy and I'll stop. If you're about to go, if you're a runner, right? You might do some stretching before you get out there and you start running, right? The same, you do some work before you start your run. Well, before you do this DEI work, there's work to do so that you're limber and in shape and you can run the marathon that this work is.
Yeah, 100%. And part of that work is sitting in communication with your employees. Like, what do they want? Because that's another problem, is organizations often bring in initiatives and they haven't really done a great job of where do they need to start, right? Like, is this very foundational? We need education because nobody really understands what this is, or they have misinformation, or are we at the practical implementation part? And I also think another piece is resources for middle management, right? So middle management often is tasked with, now you're going to roll this out. But when they get stuck, there's no coach, there's no direct lines. Sometimes that's, and I'm going to say larger companies tend to do this a little bit better because they have more resources, but they don't think about, well, what about when you get stressed, not just doing your job as the middle manager, right? But now you're having to do this DEI thing. And so how is that going to impact your working time, right? Because all of us have things that we have to get done. And DEI has been made a sort of afterthought. Like, yes, we've talked about how like it's going to be more innovative when people can be authentic, but as anybody knows, when somebody's doing something new or you're trying to change a culture or behavior, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a stressor, and people react to change most of the time with resistance. And Melonya is a change management specialist, so she knows about this a lot. And so that resistance to change, are you prepared for resistance? Because I think people think, well, if I say, that X is the thing that you should be doing because X is the right thing. If X slows down the factory line, right, and causes controversy because now I'm thinking about things I've never thought about and people are coming to work slightly different than I've ever experienced them, then I'm not for X anymore. And you were not prepared for how that rollout was going to go. You did not have the right resources in place. You didn't have the right support for your managers. And so for those who want to stay involved in this equity and inclusion process, let's really start making real change so that people say, you know what, this came in, a DEI program came in, and I saw actual gains with it. I saw that they supported us through this transition. We need to not pull away, but pour even more, perhaps, in the support pieces so that people can feel supported through the process and that it's not just rhetoric and it's not just, you're trying to put a nice package on something. You're doing this because you want to seem like you're about the work. Being about the work also means it might not happen the first year. It might not happen the second year. It's an ongoing process. So I have 2 children and I couldn't teach them something once, right? I had to reiterate it and be supportive as they grew into the people they are today. But that didn't happen overnight. And I think we expect that with education programs or with policies that say this is how you're going to treat people, that culture is going to magically change. And so first I'm going to push back and I'm going to, I don't want things to change. And I'll share one last thing and then I'll stop. When I was a bedside nurse, we had paper charts. And I remember when computerized charting came out and we pushed back so vehemently, right? Like, oh, this is more work. I have to go into this screen and I go this screen and I log this way. And why can't I just write it in the chart? Why can't I just check with a pen? That would be easier. Today, my pushback at computerized charting sounds, wow, like how could you push back on something that can improve a process, that allows people to instantaneously have access? They don't have to run to a paper chart on some floor. Now that pushback seems like I was holding back technology and advancement. But in the moment, the amount of nurses who did not want paper charts, did not want computerized charting, and doctors was huge. That change had to happen over time. And so most hospitals now have computerized records, and most of us are used to something called MyChart or some type of being able to access those electronic records, but that didn't happen overnight. And if we think about that as an example, I remember even patients saying, well, this is too confusing. Like, I don't know how to get in here, and all of us have technology now. So if our world is heading towards, because the world is becoming more diverse and we are able to move multiple places and work with people globally, how are we preparing for this? The pushback seems to be we're becoming more nationalist and isolationist. But the truth is, in 100 and 200 years, and I hate to say that long, will we look back and say, look at when we were so against integration and so against innovation and equity and authenticity? And will we look back and say, we could have been leading in this versus tagging along afterwards?
I'm going to do a shameless plug. I think some assumptions are made about the environment in which these kind of programs are brought in. You mentioned middle management, and the assumption is that they're going to be on board and willing and happy to do this work. And let's not forget, half of this country is not. Okay, so
it's another task.
it's
It's
not
another task on my job list too.
but it's not even
I'm
another
not passionate.
It's not
It's
another
just
task.
something.
I'm talking about the mindset that people are coming. Some people are not in favor of this work, and organizations cannot assume that because they roll these kind of initiatives out and then they ask their managers to implement them, that they're going to be on board, right? Because that's not their belief system. Okay, so don't make that assumption. So some of the things that can help you, some of that pre-work that we were talking about, are two things that both Tahitia and I do, and I firmly believe in it. We are both certified intercultural development inventory administrators. This tool, this assessment, helps you to understand your intercultural competency as well as the intercultural competency of your team and organization, for that matter. It's a great tool for leadership groups and for those who want to implement this, to really see on a continuum of being, very close-minded to being in terms of your understanding and dealing, acceptance of change and difference, being on a low end of that spectrum or being high end on that spectrum, will often tell you where you're going to find resistance and the type of resistance that you're going to encounter in your DEI efforts. The other thing that I would talk about is I am a pro-sci change management practitioner. And I'm not saying that you got to use me, but we can implement things and initiatives, and we have all our ducks in a row in terms of we have to complete this task and we have to do this and we have to launch that. But it doesn't take into account the people side. It doesn't take into account where the barriers are. It doesn't take into account that there's some people who are willing but just not have the resources. The pro-sci management, the pro-sci change management structure helps you to identify what is going to derail your initiatives, right? And then helps you to put plans in action and to address those barriers that are going to keep you from moving forward. Now, while this is a marathon and it does take time, also understand that when you are slow in your movement and change, what you're asking marginalized people to do is to continue to be traumatized, to continue to be diminished, and to continue to try to have some patience and some civility while being treated improperly. And that is a lot to ask of someone, and we shouldn't expect that. So if you really want to fuel your initiative, be mindful and intentional about it. Find out what people are feeling. What is their natural propensity towards difference, right? Understand where you are on a continuum from low cultural competency to high cultural competency, and then figure out the people side. Find something to be able to measure where people are, where your barriers are, and take care of those things in different iterations of what you're trying to do, to make certain that when you do make a change, that you're bringing your entire organization with you. So that's my piece for today.
Yes. And, Melonya, that's so 100% true. The people side support to it, even just being able to have a kind of safe spaces where people can connect without any type of, um, expectation where you can just resonate and sit in community sometimes can be helpful. The people side, those who you're asking to wait while you kind of get things in place and your initiative started, well, what kind of resources are you creating for them? Do you have a safe space where they can come and communicate if they're really feeling like, hey, this process is super slow and I want to understand more? What are you doing? Where you can have those details and have those conversations, where people can feel safe to express, I'm frustrated that things aren't changing quickly enough. And how will you reply to that? And do you offer, and if you decide to, do you offer like coaching sessions for how do I get through this? Because sometimes coaching can help with that too. Do you have group coaching going on when you're talking about behavioral changes or things that people are resonating around? How many of us have like a group, or how many organizations have group coaching for departments that may need to have access to a coach? And what type of coach are you using? Because there's coaches that will coach on all different types of things. So like, are you looking at that plan? Are you making a very conscious plan for your organization? Because this is not a one size fits all thing. And when I think about this a lot when I think about intersectional health equity, like what does that look like when hospitals and organizations get fully focused on what does it look like to truly say we accept all patients here and we accept, how you show up in the workplace? Because it's slightly different in healthcare organizations. You can't cut, like, you have to show up a certain way. So how do you support those who may be traumatized by their patients, right? So you could have the reverse there. How are you providing support? So I thought about this a lot as I took a couple of days, and I thought, well, where do I want to be in this space? What do I want to offer? And so as a nurse, what do I want to offer to my colleagues when it comes to intersectional health equity? And what does that look like? And I know, Melonya, I bothered you about like, hey, come look at this thing that I'm working on. But selfish plug here, I am working on an intersectional health equity course. And this past week is now sort of shaping and informing, well, what do I want to give? Because at first I was writing it very general and way too high level for a general course. But then I started thinking, well, who am I trying to reach with this? What's my frustration? What was I really trying to say? And really, I was trying to reach out to my healthcare practitioners who, maybe need just a little bit more like supports and resources and case studies and examples. And, because most of the time doctors, nurses, physicians, pharmacists, social workers, we're all about the data and the like, what's the research? And so, I've been thinking a lot about, well, how are we telling the story of what we want moving forward? What does that story look like? How do I still stay focused on equity and inclusion and diversity work? And it, many times for me, justice work. What does justice look like, and what will it look like moving forward?
Yeah. So, I think that one of the things that I would offer, anyone, and I'm doing a lot of work these days in mental fitness in my own personal practice, in my business, as well as in my own personal life, that, I really encourage all of those or anyone who is listening to really prioritize their mental fitness. That might mean, and I'm trying to decide in terms, because I'm a political junkie. Okay, I love politics, but I don't think that it is the best thing at this time for my mental fitness. It's very interesting. People who were that once lived in the United States, that live abroad or live in different parts of the world, they often talk about the fact that we are always in an election cycle here in the United States. And I think that wears on you. I think that does something to our psyches. I think that this last election was quite ugly. And I think that there's some internal healing that some of us need to, I think we all need to do it from the looks of that election. But I know that only some of us will do that work. And I really encourage you to lean into your mindful mindfulness practice. Lean into taking care of yourself physically, taking care of your bodies, taking care of your loved ones, loving yourself, and being uh, okay with feeling uncomfortable in this moment, and not necessarily having your bearings on how you want to show up in the world. Or maybe you are dealing with intense feelings of anger and sorrow, and you don't have to ignore them, you don't have to push them down, but you can sit in that space and acknowledge how you are feeling and give yourself love in those areas that are hurting you right now. And so I really encourage you to lean into the things that you can control. And what you can control is how you feel and how you think, and how you're processing this, and who, as a result of this, you become. And the goal is not to become bitter, but the goal is to empower ourselves,
Yes.
right? And so those are my parting words today.
Yes. Will this become the fire that warms your soul and brings you to action, or is it the fire that burns you out to this and you cannot do this anymore? So this fire in your belly right now, how do you burn it so that it doesn't overwhelm you? How do you control it? How do you keep it sparked and keep you invigorated without burning you out? So I've been trying to not focus too much on social media, as I mentioned before, to just keep that fire from raising and burning too bright and just making me think, oh, the world is horrible. And just, like focusing on some of the positive things, like we opened with, like neighbors who are being kind and friendly and mindful to the things that you may be experiencing. So you were going to share some Black business apps and resources.
We'll do it another time.
She's doing it another time.
Let's just end on positive.
Yes. So we love you here. If anybody needs to reach out to myself or Melonya, our contact, I believe, is somewhere at the end. But we're here for you, and we are not giving up the fight. As Harris said, the fight continues. It goes on. We regroup. We take time to reinvigorate ourselves and to restore and to reflect. I know I am more than ever focused on, what can I contribute? Where can I bring my passion and power? And so that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I've given up the fight. I'm not spending my whole life fighting. I think that it's unreasonable to ask somebody to be a soldier their entire life, right? I'm not giving up on humanity, but I want to put my energy someplace else.
Well, and I'm just a smidge younger than you, so maybe I got like.
Yeah, you got keep on fighting, Tahitia. Go ahead, girl. I support you.
Yes, right, please support me in the fight.
Yes, please. All right, folks. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Tahitia. Join us, every Friday, 9 a.m. for our.
I'll be transparent. We don't usually open these up on LinkedIn, but we opened it up this time because we figured there might be some people on LinkedIn who would resonate with our conversation around, what could we do to support each other instead, because we know people are going through it right now.
Yeah, so there we go. Join us. Thank you for your. Joining us today, and we are filling the brain drain one conversation at a time. Join us next week. Thank you, folks.
Thanks for joining us on MT Fridays. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more insightful discussions every Friday. Remember, the brain drain stops here, so keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media or visiting our website. Until next time, stay curious and keep filling your mind with knowledge. See you next week, Friday, on MT Fridays.